All right, so in this lesson, we are going to learn about scales and chords. So we are going to learn first about scales, how we form a major scale, what it is, how we form it, and then we are going to talk about how we derive chords from that scale. So if you'd like, feel free to grab a piece of paper so you could follow along. Doing music theory and learning this type of stuff is kind of like doing math. It's always easiest if you have a piece of paper to do it so you don't have to keep all the numbers and letters that we're using in your head. So if you'd like, pause this video and grab yourself a sheet of paper, or if you'd just like to follow along for right now, that is fine as well. So the first thing we need to know about a scale is that a scale is a set of 8 notes, with the first and the last being the same. And basically what we are doing to form a scale is we start on a note, and then what we do is we follow a pattern of whole steps and half steps. So before we start writing it down, let me just quickly explain what a whole step and what a half step is on the piano. So starting with a half step is basically when you start on one note and you go to the next immediate note. So if we wanted to do a half step up is this way on the piano going higher. So a half step would take us to here because that is the next possible note. So if I go up a half step from here, it would take us to there, right? So I'm always just hitting the next possible note, whether it's black or white. So these are all half step movements. So from here, from our note E, if I want to go a half step, it's right there because there is no possible note in between. So these are all half steps. So all these are examples of going up in half steps. So now what a whole step is a whole step is when we are going up 2 half steps. So if we start on C, our half step would be here to C sharp, and another half step would be to D. So a whole step from C would be to D. From D, if we do a whole step, we'd skip that one because that's our half step, and there's our whole step. And then one more example, starting from this note, a whole step up would not be this note because this is our half step because there's nothing in between. So there's our whole step. So a whole step is when you skip a single key, whether it is black or white. So that is all we need to know about whole steps and half steps. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of paper and we are going to write out the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just like that. So we are going to be able to see our numbers like that. We're just writing them horizontally. So now the first thing we want to do is we want to write down the pattern that we follow for a major scale. So the major scale goes like this. Starting from the first note, to get to the second note, you need to do a whole step. So I'm going to write a W here, right? So W will stand for whole step, H will stand for half step. So first note to second note, we need a whole step. From our second note to our third note, we will also need a whole step. From our third note to our fourth note, we will need a half step. From our fourth note to our fifth note, we will need a whole step. From our fifth note to our sixth note, we will need a whole step. From our sixth note to our seventh note, a whole step. And from our seventh note to our eighth note, a half step. So that is the major scale pattern. It will always be this exact pattern. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So now the rest is just plugging in the information. So if we wanted to make a C scale, for example, what we are going to do is we are going to start on the note C like this. So I'm going to put the letter C underneath number 1 because we are doing a C scale. So we want to do a C major scale. So we want C to be note number 1. So now we just have to follow our pattern. So if C is note number 1, which I'll play right here, the first move we want to make is a whole step. So to get to our second note, we do a whole step. That will take us to the note D, which is our second note in our scale. So I will put in the D there. From our second note to our third note, we need a whole step. So from our D, we go up a whole step. That will take us to the note E. From our third note to our fourth note, we need a half step, So that will take us to F because there's our half step. So our fourth note is F. From our fourth note F to get to our fifth note, we need a whole step. So there is our whole step there to G. From our fifth note G, we will need a whole step. So here's G, we need a whole step. That'll take us to A. From our sixth note A to get to our seventh note, we will need another whole step. So that will take us to B. And then finally, from our 7th note, B, to our 8th note, we will need a half step, which takes us right next door to C, which makes sense because the first and the last note of a scale are all the same. So this is our C major scale. If I were to play the C major scale, and some of you may know do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is what it comes from the major scale. So this is our C major scale. The notes in the C major scale are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So now, from this scale, we can start to make chords within our scale. Now here's the way we do it. Each number is above a note, right? So C is the first note of our scale, D is the second note of our scale, E is the third note of our scale, F is the 4th, G is the 5th, A is the 6th, and B is the 7th. So if we wanted to make a chord based off the first note of our scale, so I'm just going to put a 1 here, this would be called our 1 chord because we are going to make a chord based off of the first note of our scale. So we know the first note of our chord is going to be C, and now to get the rest of the notes of a chord, it's very simple. This is how all chords are formed. You start on the note, and then all you do is do every other note. So we're starting on C. So from C, we're going to skip D, get to E. So E is going to be the next note in our chord. And then from E, we are going to do the same thing, go up and skip a note, and that will take us to G. So our C major chord is C, E, G. That is our C major chord because this is from the C major scale, the first chord in our scale. So anytime you want to find a major chord, you simply build the scale like we did. You could start with other notes other than C and follow this pattern, and then do every other note, and that will give you the major chord. So this is our C major chord. But now, within our scale, we have many other chords. We can build what's called the 2 chord because D is the second note in our scale. So I'm going to put a 2 here for 2 chord. We do the same thing. We start on D. There's our D. And now we just do every other note from D. So D, skip over E, will take us to F. So F is also in the chord. And then from F, we skip a note and go up. And that takes us to A. So D, F, A would be our 2 chord. Now in this case, the 2 chord is going to be a minor chord. Now we haven't talked about minor chords and minor scales just yet, so don't worry about it, but just know that only the first chord of the scale is guaranteed to be a major chord. So you can keep doing this. You can get the 3 chord by starting on the E, because that is the third note of our scale, and just start on E. So here is number 3. We start with an E, and just do every other note from E. So E, G, B would be our 3rd chord of the scale. And we're going to keep going and do the next one. So that's our 3rd chord. So we have our 1 chord is our C chord, our 2 chord is our D chord, our 3 chord is our E chord. Now from here, we can get to our 4 chord. F is our 4th note. So we start on F and we do every other note. So F, A, C. And there is our 4 chord. We can keep this going. So now we get to our 5 chord. So here is 5. G is going to be our first note. Skip a letter, gets us to B. And then when we skip a letter after that, you see we run out of letters. But all musical alphabet and all scales just loop over continuously. So after C, it's just like going back to the beginning. So we would skip over C and get to D. So it would go G, B, skip over C would take us to D. So that is our 5 chord right there. And then we can keep going. We have 2 more, so we might as well finish them. Feel free to try these on your own. 6th note of the scale is A. So we start on A, skip a letter would take us to C, and then skip a letter from C would take us to E. So A, C, E is the 6th chord of our scale. And then last but not least, the 7 chord in our scale is starting on B. Do every other letter from B. So B skips over C, it wraps around, takes us to D. Skip 1 from D, takes us to F. So B, D, F. So you can see that every chord is just starting on a note, and then doing every other letter. So here's our 1 chord, our 2 chord, our 3 chord, our 4 chord, our 5 chord, our 6 chord, and our 7 chord. Now, for this lesson, and for this first lesson and the first song we're going to play in this course, we really only need to know the C chord, which is our 1 chord. We need to know the F chord, which is our 4 chord, and we need to know the G chord, which is our 5 chord. So those are the only 3 we're going to know for this course, but feel free, this is the only chords we're going to need to know for this lesson of this course, but feel free to practice the other ones as well. And you could do this, and we will start to do this exact thing in future lessons with other scales. So for right now, we're only doing the key of C major because we're doing our major scale pattern, and we're starting with C. That will create your C major scale. So if you wanted to make a G major scale, for example, you would follow the same pattern, but your first letter would be G, and then you would follow your patterns of whole steps and half steps from there. So like I said, this is how you build a scale. This is how you derive chords from the scale, just picking the letter underneath each number and doing every other note from there. So like I said, for this lesson, this song, you will only need to know the C chord, the F chord, and the G chord, right? And now one more thing I want to talk about with chords is something called inversions. So when we play a chord, let's take our C chord, for example, which we now know is C, E, G. These are the notes of the C chord. We just saw how we build the notes of a C chord. Once we have the notes of a C chord like this, we can actually change the order of these notes and it will still be a C chord. This is called a chord inversion. So if we start here, if we want to build another C chord without doing the chord notes in this order, we could take our note on the bottom, which is C, and bring it up top. So now the order of our notes will be E, G, C. Still the same notes that we were playing earlier, now just in a different order, but this is still a C chord. And we can do this another time. So instead of C, E, G, which we learned is our C chord, this is called root position because the C is on the bottom. We can invert it by bringing the C to the top. This would be called our first inversion, E, G, C. And then we can do this again by bringing our E to the top now, and now our order becomes G, C, E. This would be called a second inversion. Inversions are very important, so when you're practicing these chords, practice it in lots of different ways. Root position, first position, second position. And when I say position, I mean inversion, so root position, first inversion, second inversion. And when you're playing these with the left hand, you will use your 5th finger, 3rd finger, 1st finger for root position. You will use the same fingers for first inversion, 5th, 3rd, and 1st. And then for second inversion, 5th, 2nd, 1st. Now you still do 5, 3, 1, but 5, 2, 1 will be more comfortable. So practice that, your C chord in its root position, first inversion and second, and then do the same with the F chord. Root position, first inversion, second inversion. And then same with your G chord. Root position, first inversion, second inversion. So that is all the music theory you will need to know for this first lesson, and this will get you playing your first Christmas song, which I will see you in the next lesson to start playing this song.